Nonprofit called PACE, the federal investigation. It's an involuntary tie to a federal investigation. 6 News' Bella Caracta spoke to the organization's leaders about the impact on their mission to organize free sports activities for kids in our community.
John, we now know that former Omaha police captain and past PACE executive director Richard Gonzalez allegedly defrauded the organization of about $9,500, a fraction of the fraud conspiracy related to funds collected for the Latino Peace Officers Association. Lance Jones, chairman of the PACE board, made the distinction between the two organizations and the other defendants clear.
I don't know 3 of the defendants. Don't know them personally. In fact, one of them, I just saw his face for the first time Friday. So we're a completely separate organization. Most of the allegations in the indictment were made against the other organization.
In a statement today, PACE said these allegations against the former executive director are about his actions and not the PACE organization. Tony Espejo founded PACE nearly 2 decades ago and stepped up as the interim executive director when Gonzalez resigned in January.
How did this happen? I think something like this can happen anywhere at any time, right? It's about trust. It's about people doing the right thing and doing their job the right way, right? It just, when it happened to us, it affected our community and our kids.
In December, Mayor Jean Stothert pulled funding from PACE after learning it was involved in a federal investigation. After reviewing the indictments Friday, she said it's a clear sign that PACE as an organization was taken advantage of. And quote, "In the coming weeks, I intend to meet with the PACE board and leadership to determine the best plan to continue the city's cooperation with PACE," unquote. Stothert has not yet said if funding would be restored, and with no guaranteed money from the city, PACE must adjust.
Because I would like to be able to offer more kids this opportunity, but because of this, what's going on, we have to live within our means, right? Like anybody does.
But summer sports are still on the agenda, he says. On your side in Omaha, Bella Caracta, 6 News.
And we are told that there are still spots, although limited, to sign up for free summer activities with PACE online.